I always say that I never sang any style of music that I hadn't heard in my household growing up. I can't approach it with any kind of authenticity.
Los Angeles, 1979. A bustling night backstage at the legendary Troubadour. The air hummed with the electric sound of guitars, the clink of glasses, and the presence of music royalty. Then, the calm shattered. A young assistant burst into the promoter's office, visibly rattled. Linda Ronstadt had just left the green room, again because of one name on the performance list. Not hers, not the Eagles, but his. She was gone in an instant. No shouting, no questions. Just an ice-cold departure, followed by years of utter silence. No one truly understood what happened that night, and Linda. She never explained. There were no public feuds, no tabloid tantrums, just a persona of perfect composure and unshakable grace. For decades, her silence was absolute. But now, it's broken. In a rare moment of candid revelation, Linda Ronstadt is finally disclosing the 7 musicians she never forgave, the ones who wounded her pride, challenged her artistry, and exposed the harsh realities of the music industry. The list is surprising. These are not minor squabbles or forgotten resentments. These are the pivotal moments that defined a generation of rock and roll, filled with power struggles, shattered trust, and quiet retribution. The most shocking revelation. Some of these names were once her closest confidants. First on the list, a drummer who became a superstar, using her as a stepping stone before ultimately trampling over her. If you think you know who it is, reconsider. The drummer who outgrew his own rhythm before the Eagles achieved iconic status. Don Henley was merely Linda's drummer and backup vocalist, grateful for the early spotlight she provided. In the early 70s, Linda Ronstadt was a rising star, filling venues across the country. Henley was the quiet man behind the drum kit, benefiting from her surging fame. She gave him his big break, but once the Eagles took flight, everything shifted. Henley was no longer the humble musician. His ego swelled with the band's success. The group that once opened for Linda now swaggered through Sunset Boulevard as if they owned it. Henley in particular began to act like the Lord of the Canyon, dismissing the woman who helped launch his career. The breaking point came in 1975, backstage at the Universal Amphitheater. Henley made a comment that still hurts her to this day. He ridiculed her musical direction, sneering that she should stick to covers and let real songwriters do the talking. His words weren't just insulting. They were a complete dismissal of everything she had built with grit, passion, and raw talent. Linda didn't just walk out. She had his tour credentials revoked on the spot. No second chances given. Industry rumors spread about Henley's unchecked arrogance. Friends and roadies quietly spoke of his cocaine-fueled outbursts, ego-driven decisions, and the cruel insults he'd hurl behind closed doors. What wounded Linda most wasn't just the betrayal, but the profound disrespect. In private, she would later call him a social climber who lost his soul in the pursuit of fame. But Henley wasn't the only one to cross a line. Linda's next conflict didn't unfold quietly behind the scenes. It played out live in front of an audience, involving a drunk lead singer, a hijacked microphone, and a public humiliation so profound she never forgave it. The night Jim Morrison went too far. It was 1968. The summer of love was over, but the chaos remained. The Doors were an explosive live act, and Linda Ronstadt was still fighting to make her name in a male-dominated industry. That night, at a private after-party near the Whiskey A Go-Go, legends and outcasts mingled freely. No one anticipated what would happen when Jim Morrison noticed Linda. He was already several drinks in, shirt half unbuttoned, swaggering through the crowd. In a moment of madness and ego, Morrison pulled Linda onto the stage without warning. It was unplanned, not a sweet gesture, was a reckless one. Then he leaned in, right in front of everyone, and tried to kiss her. Linda instinctively recoiled. Morrison lost his footing, stumbled into her mic stand, and nearly toppled the entire setup. Gasps, stares, and whispers filled the room. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or panic. The moment was never captured on film, but it became a whispered legend passed around backstage and in late-night radio stories for years. Morrison never apologized. In fact, months later in a radio interview, he mocked her, calling her sweet but spineless and dismissing her as harmless, forgettable. Linda never retaliated. Publicly, she never did. But behind closed doors, her words were sharp. Within her inner circle, she called Morrison a brilliant wreck who poisoned everything around him. To her, he wasn't just a chaotic performer. He was a symbol of the toxic masculinity that sought to control every aspect of the music world. While Morrison's antics left emotional scars, the next betrayal was not delivered with slurred words or drunken kisses. It came during a moment of solidarity when Linda believed she was among friends. Supporting a cause she risked her career for until one of her supposed allies turned on her. When protest became personal, Neil Young. It was 1976. A benefit. Concert for Farm Workers had brought together some of the biggest names in rock, including two artists known for their voices and their convictions, Linda Ronstadt and Neil Young. On the surface, they were allies united by a cause they both deeply believed in. But the moment the spotlight hit, everything changed. Backstage, tensions flared as Neil began to dismiss Linda's creative input. He rejected her song suggestions, prevented her from performing certain tracks, and even criticized her sound as too commercial. To make matters worse, after the show, he reportedly told the press that she wasn't built for protest. The implication was clear. Linda wasn't authentic enough for the fight. She left the venue in tears. It wasn't just an insult. It was a profound betrayal from someone she respected, someone she thought shared her values. Being labeled as hollow by a fellow activist cut deeper than any critic ever could. That night was a turning point. From that moment on, no matter how noble the cause, Linda never again shared a stage with Neil Young. Behind closed doors, she called him loud in message, cruel in execution. To her, his activism rang hollow when paired with such arrogance. But if that moment shook her personally, the next one would devastate her artistically. Because this next betrayal did not stem from backstage politics or public statements. It happened in the middle of a studio session in front of a room full of musicians, where Linda's confidence was stripped away by a single chilling remark. When genius turns to cruelty, Frank Zappa. Their meeting in 1974 carried the promise of something iconic. Frank Zappa, the unpredictable avant-garde mad genius of experimental rock. Linda Ronstadt, genre-defying, vocally unstoppable, and on the rise. On paper, it was a collaboration that could have redefined music. Instead, it unraveled in a matter of hours. It started with hope. Quinda expressed a genuine desire to record one of Zappa's songs, but the moment they stepped into the studio, things soured. Zappa dismissed her creative suggestions with a smirk, calling her sound too sanitized. He accused her of trying to dilute his music, turning raw art into a jingle fit for car commercials. The tension peaked during a live rehearsal. Stopped the band cold. The room fell silent. Then, in front of everyone, he sneered, "This is what happens when you hand real music to a pop singer." The room froze. Linda didn't yell or argue. She quietly gathered her things and walked out, humiliated and hurt. She never came back and never collaborated with Zappa again. Publicly, she said nothing, but behind the scenes, close friends clearly recall her words. She called Zappa brilliant but brutal, a mind she respected but a man she could never trust. Still, creative differences with difficult artists were one thing. What came next was a deeper pain, because the next name on her list wasn't an eccentric genius or a chaotic performer. It was someone she once called family, a fellow pioneer. Who turned on her when it mattered most? Laurel Canyon's falling out? David Crosby. In the golden glow of Laurel Canyon, Linda Ronstadt and David Crosby were like musical family. They shared not just stages and studio time, but a deep, unspoken trust forged in the countercultural movement they both helped create. Crosby's harmonies and Linda's genre-bending vocals were part of the same revolutionary wave, and their bond seemed unbreakable. But by 1978, that harmony had devolved into tension. During a session for a collaborative track, Linda requested a simple key change to better suit her voice. Crosby refused, brushing her off with a dismissive, "You should learn to adapt." What might have been a minor disagreement quickly escalated. Heated words were exchanged, and the argument didn't stay in the studio. Within days, it had been leaked to the press, becoming one of the most talked-about clashes in the Canyon. But it didn't end there. Crosby went public in Rolling Stone, calling Linda manufactured, implying she was more a product than a talent. For Linda, who had built her entire career on raw skill and creative instinct, it was a dagger to the heart. She didn't respond in interviews, but her silence was anything but passive. She made a quiet but pointed move. She banned his name from being spoken around her band and inner circle. Studio musicians were instructed not to mention him, and his music was removed from her tour playlists. It was as if he no longer existed in her world. To Linda, Crosby had betrayed not just a friendship, but the very ideal of what Laurel Canyon had once represented. Privately, she referred to him as a warning sign, proof that even the most brilliant minds could be consumed by ego, drugs, and fame. And while Crosby's betrayal was personal, the next on our list was something colder. A public taunt that turned punk poetry into a weapon of cruelty. Punk provocation. Elvis Costello's public insult. It was 1979, and Cleveland was buzzing with energy. A major festival had brought together icons and newcomers alike. Linda Ronstadt, fresh from a series of chart-topping albums, was a headliner. At the peak of her powers, all eyes were on her. One pair belonged to Elvis Costello. He was the new kid on the block, a brash, brilliant, unfiltered punk rock intellectual with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. But no one expected what happened next. In front of a group of reporters, Costello sneered, calling Linda's set background music for brunch. It was more than a jab. It was a public humiliation. The comment spread quickly, and when Linda confronted him backstage, hoping for clarification or an apology, she got something else entirely. Costello, reportedly drunk and arrogant, looked her in the eye, delivered another cold insult, and walked off without a word of remorse. Linda never looked back. To her, Elvis Costello represented something more than just one rude remark. He embodied a new kind of artist, clever but heartless, critical without compassion, not rebellious but cruel for cruelty's sake. She saw no soul in his defiance, only ego. And yet, even that bitterness couldn't compare to the final heartbreak on her list, because the last name wasn't a wild rocker or a brash newcomer. It was someone whose music should have harmonized with hers. A voice so compatible it seemed like fate was trying to put them on the same path. But behind the scenes, the clash was undeniable, and what should have been a dream collaboration became a silent war. Perfection or control. Paul Simon's cold dismissal. In 1982, it seemed like the perfect partnership. Paul Simon, one of the most respected songwriters of his generation, and Linda Ronstadt, the reigning queen of genre-defying vocals. When she agreed to duet with him for his upcoming album, fans and industry insiders were abuzz with excitement. On paper, it was a dream. In reality, it was a slow-burning nightmare. From the first rehearsal, things felt off. Simon was a constant nitpicker, interrupting takes to correct phrasing that didn't need fixing. He rewrote lyrics without consulting her and offered vocal advice that felt more like thinly veiled criticism, according to those close to Linda. She later described the experience as feeling like being scolded by a principal. Every note she sang was met with scrutiny, not support. The chemistry never materialized. The creative spark fizzled under the weight of ego and condescension. The song was ultimately shelved, unfinished, unreleased, and unspoken of for years. But for Linda, the damage wasn't about one track. It was about being treated as less than a voice like hers, a legacy like hers, deserved a partner. Instead, she got a dictator. After that, she made a silent vow to herself. She would never step into a studio with Paul Simon again. With that final fracture, Linda Ronstadt's silence on her biggest betrayals had officially unraveled. 7 musicians, 7 scars, all hidden. behind decades of elegance until now. Because behind every harmony, there's a story no one hears until someone is brave enough to tell it. Why she kept it quiet all these years. Linda Ronstadt has never been one to fuel the gossip machine. For decades, she let the music do the talking. But these revelations aren't about revenge. They're about truth. She built her legacy not just on talent, but on surviving egos, betrayals, and a ruthless industry. And in finally telling these stories, she isn't tearing others down. She's lifting a veil, because sometimes the greatest strength isn't in the songs we sing, but in the silence we choose to break. Which of these stories shocked you the most, and do you think Linda was right to stay silent all those years? Let us know below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.